Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On this Friday evening after a very vibrant day at COP27 here in Sharm-el-Sheikh, we do have an audience also online, so I want to welcome you as well. We will be using the Slido for any questions that the audience might have, and we're going to address those questions in the end of the discussion and the introductions of the panelists. In the audience, you can also use the headsets so that you can be more tuned into the discussions, or you might not as well. My name is Erkki Ani. I'm the CEO of Cleantech Estonia and Cleantech for Baltics, so doing everything in the supporting very, very early stage startups to get up on the ground, then off the ground, and then scale up the technologies into the wild, wild world. With me today, I have at the panel called How Can Cleantech and Private Sector Innovation Support Pathways Towards Reaching Climate Neutrality? Four panelists, all of them are from private sector, from startups, which I do love a lot. I'm going to start introducing the panelists briefly, and I want each of the panelists to then also briefly describe about what is it that your company does, and why you do it, what you do. On my left-hand side, first up is Einar Karu, the CTO at Up Catalyst, that is dealing with direct air capture. He's going to tell a bit more about it, but they're developing carbon nanomaterials. Also, the only hardware startup that we have in a panel at the moment. You have previous education from environmental chemistry, also environmental science from UK, but also from Germany, postdoc research fellow at Max Planck Institute. So tell us, what does Up Catalyst do?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Erkki, for this very kind introduction. Yes, at Up Catalyst, actually, first I would start from the more general picture. So I would say it's all about implementation and action to reach the climate goals we have. And what we do at Up Catalyst, we are turning CO2 electrochemically into carbon in the form of carbon nanomaterials and oxygen. So this is direct carbon capture and utilization and also storage. But not only, we are even valorizing this CO2. We are producing valuable material which is used for producing batteries. Our spatial focus is on electrical vehicle batteries. On average, electrical vehicle battery pack has 66 kilograms of carbon, and this is fossil-based. We have a great alternative for that. With our sustainable technology, we need sustainable electrical energy, and we can produce sustainable carbon nanomaterials. So we are very keen to lead the world to sustainable carbon.
Thank you. Next up is Lubomila Jordanova. Maybe for more than 20,000 followers that you have, they don't need the 60,000. They don't need the explanation of what you do or who you are. You are the CEO and co-founder of Plan A, which is essentially an ESG reporting automation for businesses, a startup out of Berlin. So tell us more about you.
First of all, thank you so much for having us. The company that I've been building for the last 6 years is called Plan A, and what we do is decarbonization tracking and policy alignment. What does this mean in practice? We have a software as a service platform where corporates can assess sometimes millions of data points and then automatically get a prescription on how they can improve. This prescription is really practical suggestions of initiatives that they can implement that give them a pathway towards net zero. And given also we are at an EU event, it's important to say that something that we all know, there's been a lot of legislation lately that has been popping up. Corporates are finding it quite difficult to navigate all of the different KPIs that they need to track, all of the different legislations that are coming up. So we've automated as part of the platform the capacity for any business to understand what legislation they need to follow and what kind of report they need to prepare when.
Thank you. And the next visionary founder, CEO and co-founder at Single Earth, we have Merit Valtsalu. Single Earth is integrating nature protection into the economy. The way how they do that is mind-blowing. I think you can briefly kind of give a teaser about what you do, or try to put it in a nutshell.
Yes, and first of all, really thank you for having all of us here. It's super exciting to be here at COP27 and in this particular booth representing the European Union. So what we do at Single Earth, well, in a very short sentence, we're creating the world's first nature-backed currency to solve, obviously, climate change and also biodiversity loss. So the problem that we started solving roughly 3 years ago was that we understood that, well, it actually started from a very local problem. So in Estonia, in my home country, we have a lot of forests that are being cut down for timber. So we started solving the problem, like what can we do to make a change? And we understood that the main driver of forest cover loss is the financial incentives. So we understood that we need to create a financial incentive for landowners to keep their forest growing. And then the second part comes into play when we create these digital tokens based on the work nature does for the ecosystem services, starting from carbon removal, but actually already adding biodiversity and other ecosystem services there as well. So the second part of the impact comes from the fact that if we roll this out as an actual currency, so a currency that you can buy things with, there will limit the amount of tokens that is always in circulation to how much nature can sustain. And by that, we are literally creating a net zero economy because the economy can never grow bigger than how much nature can sustain and what's the capacity of nature. So that's the big vision that we're building. That aligns very nicely with all the net zero goals that we're discussing here at COP27, but also more broadly, biodiversity and other ecosystem services that also have to be valued in nature as well.
I'm excited to hear in the discussion a bit more deeper into that as well. Thank you. And we have Ado Lõhmus, the head of sustainability and government affairs at Timbetter, which is essentially a forestry industry management platform. He has previous experience in the public sector, rather, working in the UN as a lead negotiator of global political declaration on international environmental governance, if I had that correct. So Ado, tell us about yourself.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. And also from our side, thank you very much for organizing this event and giving the opportunity to be part of the ecosystem, startup ecosystem of Estonia. Timbetter is the main mission. What Timbetter has is a very hard to, of course, achieve. It's a digital transformation in forestry, and saying that it's supporting the technology. Through the technology, supporting increasing the transparency and traceability in the forest sector, which seems to be very rigid sector in applying new technologies. And but taking into account, we are currently at the COP27, one of the articles of Paris Agreement, Article 13, transparency framework. This is where the Timbetter is providing the support for. We're working in different developing countries, but also in the European countries. And more excitingly, why the Timbetter is useful for the states and the private sector is exactly it helps to operate and manage the data, get a better overview, fight with illegal logging, but also have opportunity to put in place the accurate revenue system. And one exciting news also for in terms of in the margins of the COP27, the next week we will sign also the memorandum of understanding with the Amazon states in Brazil, where we also see that the opportunities are now there. The new administration has also a vision that fighting with the illegal deforestation is something where Timbetter could also jump in, and of course, happy to discuss further on our further developments.
If I do remember, thank you. If I do remember correctly, last year at COP26 in Glasgow, you actually started negotiations with Brazil.
Yeah, we had then one state, Pernambuco. Now we are working with 9 states, all who are in the Amazon region. And where we see also that the additional partnership is needed from the remote sensing side. So the ground-based inventory, which is in the pipeline of development of Timbetter, besides tracing and transparency of the timber, also to provide a solution for a fully automated ground-based inventory, which amazing to say, it's 2022, it's still manual based. All the data which is also used for the carbon sequestration calculations at the national level is coming from the manual based, where we see also the opportunity where Estonian driven startup can change a bit the world with the other partners from Estonia, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, typically the governments are expected to kind of help develop the supportive ecosystem for startups or entrepreneurship to, sprout from their economies, so that incubators, accelerators, or successful businesses could begin. Then this is what the governments or the nations provide to the private sector. But today, let's kind of keep on the narrative that what actually the cleantech sector or the cleantech startups or the private sector could provide to the public sector to combat the climate crisis and reach the climate targets that we have set. Just to maybe kind of give you a brief statistics or the overview of the cleantech sector that we're talking about. So cleantech sector itself is regarded as energy, agriculture and food, transportation, logistics, novel materials, but also ICT solutions. Throughout the history of mankind, there has been basically two eras of cleantech kind of booms, or coming of cleantech startups or technologies. The first one was in the 2000s, when mostly renewable energy, storage, etc. were being developed. That quickly ended up in 2008 for obvious reasons. Now, the second coming of cleantech started in 2014, 15, 16, so-called cleantech 2.0, which was very much backed by the ICT or the info technology that was developed by then that could enable developing more sustainable solutions based on that. Since then, the cleantech sector has been growing year on year. Looking at, for example, 2020 and 2021, the private investments into cleantech startups or innovation have risen threefold, either in Europe, globally, in US, Asia, etc. So for example, in Europe, 2020 saw the investments of 4 billion euros invested into cleantech startups, while in 2021, it was 11 billion euros. That was pretty much the same trend that goes all across the world, also Estonia. And what is backing that is, well, most obviously the regulations for once. The regulations that have set the clear targets that, for example, corporates, private sector has to achieve, creating some kind of a demand so that the larger industries, companies have to adapt to. So they need to involve novel materials that could be more efficient, more cheap. For example, they have to be more efficient in the energy use, etc. as well. Consumer demand, of course, people are more aware. People tend to buy more eco products, creating a demand there. And today, also the energy crisis, all the world, around the world as well. So that kind of creates a huge competition, or even, I'd say, a hunt towards those clean tech or more efficient solutions that our panelists here represent. But now, coming to the discussion points, when it comes to ambitions, globally, climate ambitions, do you think your company, or how aligned is your company to help nations reach their climate goals? Have you ever thought about that? Or if not, could you kind of position your company in helping reach the climate targets? You're nodding, maybe you want to kick it off?
How we think about nations from Plan A's perspective is that they're essentially a big community of companies. At the end of the day, the economy is heavily dependent on businesses to be able to deliver on the creation of value. And if you look at how all the commitments on a country level have been done, they always involve industry as part of what needs to be decarbonized and what needs to be improved in terms of impact. We have also started looking into cities as these kinds of entities, where you have a church, you have a school, but also an office. And if you look at the benefits that maybe businesses have as a stakeholder within a nation that can push these net zero agendas, is that you have a lot of capital that can be moved towards all these goals of the countries. You have a lot of people that you can influence, and usually the speed is a lot faster than that of the regulator. In the context of the EU, I think we have an unprecedented situation where the regulatory framework has actually pushed faster than what usually would be an initiative of the private sector. And I'm particularly excited about this because the amount of panic calls that we received when the EU taxonomy was launched, which is not necessarily good because maybe there was a problem with the communication of the taxonomy or kind of the release of it. But ultimately what this meant was that people were understanding that they were not going to have a way out if they had a certain level of assets or capital under management without also looking into taking tangible action. We can go into all the challenges. I'm happy for us to cover them because I think it's really important that we are critical of what is the progress that has been made to date, because it's not only good news, but ultimately I think businesses as a stakeholder are the most critical element of the net zero puzzle for the EU, but also globally.
Maybe I would like to add here that it's a collaborative goal to reach the net zero, and I think the collaboration between public, private, also startups, and the whole mankind needs to work together to reach the climate zero goals, net zero goals. And I think it's very important how it's also monitored. For example, in case of our technology, we can directly measure the weight of the material that we turned into solid material that was originated from CO2. And I think the reporting and regulation in that terms is super important. And Eric asked, have we ever thought how we can manage to achieve the goals of nations? We have definitely thought about that. With our technology, to produce 1 ton of material, we are removing 3.7 tons of CO2. So if we think about EV battery business in global terms, UN has estimated there will be 145 million electrical vehicles on the road by 2030. That requires 10 million tons of carbon raw material. And in our case, the raw material is actually waste, CO2. So waste is becoming the new raw material. And we are valorizing this CO2 into carbon nanomaterials, which will be then the sustainable raw material for battery manufacturing. And if we compare it with the current technologies existing, if they produce 1 ton of material, on average 224 tons of CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere to produce 1 ton. So it's definitely in the terms of the nation terms states as well.
Yep.
All right. So totally agree with both of you that the industry plays a huge role in all of this. But I've been thinking about the question, like who is responsible, who has to solve climate change? And I've been like, it's been a journey for me to find the answer, and I still don't know if it's the right answer, but it's an answer for me at least. So at first, I personally started to kind of think that, well, governments are going to solve that. We have these COPs, and like they are going to figure this out. I think the main feeling that I've kind of received from the day that I've spent here at COP27, listening to the presentations, to the overviews of the greenhouse gas reports and the gap and how we're doing, I think everybody now starts to understand that, well, governments alone cannot do that. It's not something that you can just fix with a law or you can just, get done with. Like otherwise we would have already done this. It wouldn't be COP number 27 this year. So I think that's like for one. So I was expecting that they will figure it out. Probably not going to happen like that. But we still obviously need their commitments and their strategies to kind of give us the framework how to work with this problem. Then the second idea that I had, well, we have that big emitters. Well, they are obviously responsible for all of the everything that's happening, so they have to fix it. So even when we started building a Single Earth, we at first built our use case around the fact that if we take forests and we create some sort of ecosystem service tokens, let's say something related to carbon, well, then there's going to be companies that are going to buy these tokens and the world is going to be saved. And I think it took me like 2 years or even more down the line when I realized that, well, the companies are also not going to solve this problem. The reason being, very honestly speaking, it's because none of the businesses that exist today have been built with the goal of solving climate change. Maybe the startups here are like a different kind. But mostly, if we talk about the industry, if we talk about whatever companies, they have been built to generate money for the shareholders. And this is why businesses are created. So they can finance nature protection or climate solutions or everything around that, but they always have a limitation to how much money they will spend on that. They will never spend more than what is kind of still feasible for their business, so they can't kind of give away too much money of what they have. So in essence, I also understood that, well, companies alone are not going to solve this either. So who is it then going to be? And my answer to that right now is that it's going to be the people. Because climate change poses the biggest threat to us as individuals. So it's up for us to fight for our survival. It's up to us to kind of find the solutions that we can do in our daily, whatever decisions that we make that have to be aligned with these goals. And this is how we ended up playing this token around in a way that we can issue this as a currency, because then we were already thinking on a very global scale. So we started from a very local problem and a very simple solution, and then we understood that, well, the problem is global. We have forestation problems all over the world. We have nature is being destroyed all over the world, although it is the fastest way to kind of mitigate climate change and use these opportunities to kind of solve climate crisis. And we ended up understanding, like, we need to work with something that connects all these parties, like individuals mostly, but then also how do they interact with businesses? How do they interact with the governments? What is the one thing that connects the entire economy? And we understood that it's the currency. It's the currency that we use in our daily transactions. It's the one thing that basically unites the entire global humankind. We all make our transactions in some sort of a currency. And if we're able to create something that changes the way, like, where do we place financial value? And if we switch that to something that is valuable, like the most valuable asset on this planet is the nature that makes this planet habitable for us. If we put that at the center or at the heart of value creation, we are actually able to turn the economy around. So if you ask the question, like, how do we contribute to these climate goals, then at some point we understood that if we're going to spend our lifetimes doing something, it has to be something that will solve the biggest challenges of today's generation and probably the generations to come. We basically decided that the company can't just create value to just some parties and do a few things here or there. We have to have the boldest vision. And as startups, it is kind of our responsibility. Because if we think of the governments, then we can't expect them to make disruptive changes, because this is not what governments do. They are there to kind of keep everything at peace. They are there to retain the status quo, which is fine. This is like an important thing that they must do. The same thing goes for businesses. They are there for their own kind of expectations. They need to run their businesses. So the one kind of group of audience that is responsible and that is directly affected by the climate change is people, and the one group of entrepreneurs who can actually do these things are startups. Startups are there to disrupt, to create these crazy solutions. Then the industry can take these solutions over, and then the governments can also do that. So I think the best way how we as startups can help to solve the greatest challenges is by coming up with the craziest solutions, testing them, trying to implement them, making them work, and then handing them over to the industries and scaling them across the world.
Otto, before you cue in, if it's okay, I'm going to cue Lou in because
I disagree. And I think it's important that we maybe have a bit of a advocate, the devil perspective in a way that we work with more than 1,000 businesses, and I can tell you that some of them are fully putting all of their resources into fighting climate change because they know that if they don't fix it, their business does not exist. There's no business on a failing planet. And of course, like there's this human element that probably is a driving factor to push people to even get involved in the discussion as a starting point. But ultimately, what do you do with your life? Okay, you do business, but that's such a big part of your existence that it kind of requires for you to find a solution to also keep this business going. On the topic of governments, I also disagree that they are there to keep things as they are and at peace. Maybe we've been disappointed through history that this has been the approach that has been taken, but we have 7 years until climate change is basically not going to be anymore at a state for us to be able to take action that is leading to results of us living an okay life. Because now we're past the stage of assuming that we're going to be able to get back to normal. This is a panic mode for governments, and we'll see what the outcome of the 2 weeks is. I don't want to be positive or negative at this point, given we're not even halfway through it. But I think governments understand that their countries are going to start crumbling when 100 million people start being displaced from places that are in the global south that don't allow for habitable land to be used. So someone would need to take those. I fully understand what you're saying in terms of the part of startups and also of individuals, but I think it's a bit more dramatic at this point for us to assume that these stakeholders are kind of keeping things as they are.
Yeah, but then, I will just say like two more things. So first of all, I think the fact, like we just need to face the fact, like we are not achieving our climate goals. So that is like officially, it's in black and white, we are not on the pathway to do that. And the companies as well, 90% of the companies that have made net zero commitments are not on the pathway to reach any of those. So I think, like, yes, we are all doing small things and it's very necessary to do the small things, but now we need to do the big things because otherwise, like, we don't have any more time. So I think the time to make those small steps is over. It was over a few years ago, actually, already. So that's the reason.
Now it's my time. Yeah, okay, thank you. I agree and disagree some of the statements here, but like first to give the credit as a former government public servant is that without governments we will not have COP27. So actually who started raising the awareness 27 years ago were the governments and the scientists. And even 15 years ago, which I think now all we can remember, we were in the universities or doing something, that even then the awareness was not so broad like it is now. So it has been the synergy, and it has to be always the synergy. The students and the school students came to the streets only 5 years ago, not 25 years ago. So I think this is the evolution. And also, it might sound a cliche, but the climate change is not a problem, it's an opportunity. And that's why we are sitting here. We understand, we are the front runners. These 40,000 people here, most of them have understood that. So they're now how we can scale our ideas so we influence the industries because they are the biggest emitters, and we provide the solutions for the broader perspective to uptake is something what is in our hands. But where I'm seeing also that the synergies between governments and without them, for example, in forestry, and where Timbuktu is providing the support is the fighting the illegal logging. It's billions of dollars a year where we lose the forest and timber resource only for the illegal logging. And without the stricter frameworks, nothing will happen because the private sector will make the money there anyway. So there you need to also have some incentives, a bit stricter at the beginning, but eventually the private sector also understands that, yes, if I have a full transparency throughout the value chain, I can also make more money without losing also my resource, which is the case, for example, in Kenya. where I'm also located, is that the private sector is very interested in Timbuktu's technology because they are tired of the corruption which comes now from the government side. So it's always the coin has two sides. But where we also see that now, and Timbuktu is dedicated in climate change focus and sustainability. Also this year, the Wolf Summit, Timbuktu was also counted among the 50 climate tech startups in Central Eastern Europe, which direct impact seems to be, okay, how this technology saves the climate. It reduces the emissions directly from the transportation, and it reduces the waste, which you don't have to use anymore, and you will also be more resource efficient. But again, this, what I also mentioned, that the additional development to have a full scale of overview of the forest resource, which is a very crucial input for the climate decisions, because the sequestration projects, again, developing countries are part of the carbon offset projects, which currently is depending on the manual measurements. Doesn't make sense at all, yeah. But the money is made through this indirect estimations, where again, we need now the more broader understanding. We need the UN push, we need the EU. EU next year will most likely launch also the regulation for digitalization, monitoring and observation of the forest. These are the incentives which also now eventually will change the behavior, but also gives the opportunity for the new technologies to show that yes, we can provide you supportive measure technologies and supportive help where you can now also sustain your business. And eventually, I agree with you that it's a people, but now the people in different levels, government, private sector, and on the streets as consumers, because the awareness raising is not enough. The demand has to also come now from the consumers. Where do we have information where this timber comes for these benches here? Actually, we don't know how sustainable it has been managed or what has been the traceability. So these kind of another ideas for the startups to create the product passports, for example, is something I think which also helps the consumers.
And maybe I would just add one economic aspect here as well. I would say sustainable technologies need to become cheaper compared to the fossil technologies. And of course, this is a combination of different innovative technologies, but also governmental side plays a huge role here as well.
Yeah, so if we come back to the report that was just discussed at this stage earlier today, then it's just amazing to see that one of the things that we discuss year on year is that we should get rid of the subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. Like, how hard can it be? You just get rid of it. So I think these type of things are where we, like, I totally agree that it actually has been a huge thing done by the governments to raise the awareness of these issues, to create these forums like COP27 and COP in general. I think now they have done a big part, and now we kind of have to move more towards real actionable things rather than just making pledges, because we already have a lot of pledges that we need to start fulfilling.
I agree with you here. It sounds cheesy that we agree each other, but like the pledges, I think the COP has turned to be the who can make the biggest pledges. It sounds billions and billions every year, but now when we today attending at the Green Climate Finance Fund, it's super impossible to get access to these funds. So we have created these funds and pledges, but from the private sector perspective, it was also given the internal observation from the team there. It takes average 3 years to get approval. But 3 years, private sector do not have time and patience for that, and why should we wait? So what we have created, these different financial instruments, we should also give our understanding to ourselves as governments and the global organizations that it has to be accessible. For this to have the understanding that the money is well spent, put in place the verification system, and there you have the money already in the action.
we can wrap up the first question, I think. And I think our time is over soon, but not yet. Very good discussion on this. Let's maybe now tune into your clients, the demand from your clients. Has the kind of your proposition to different businesses, which are, I think you're mostly business to business startups, so has it changed or evolved throughout the years? And what is the status today? Do you really need to still explain what is it that you do, why the company should use your product or service, or how has that changed?
In the context of Plan A, a lot of the regulatory changes have been of a lot of help because it created a sense of urgency for businesses to understand what sustainability means to their existence. And also it created visibility that there will be a unification of the reporting standards, but also the action that is expected after the reporting. If I compare to 2016 when the company launched the status versus today, we're of course centuries ahead. And I'm incredibly grateful to all the movement on all stakeholder level that has happened because it has made everyone's life in our industry a lot easier. In 2016, climate change in a way was an opinion. You could ask many people what they thought was their responsibility, and ultimately they would say the government needs to do something, individuals need to do something, but they would never take the responsibility in their own realm. Today, there's a clear understanding that greenwashing is not an option. The EU, just with the acceptance of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive yesterday, but also the announcements about the funding that is going for Egypt that was just made by Biden, for methane leaks. There's an understanding of this communal action that needs to be taken. And how businesses see themselves in this whole play is we always divide them in three categories. There's those that are the laggards that just want to fulfill the requirements of the governments. They tick off a box where they prepare a report and then that's their sustainability and ESG agenda. The second type is those that are going a little bit beyond. They're setting up teams, they're defining a lot more details to how they're going to take action. They've put the science-based targets and they put money behind initiatives. And in these cases, normally sustainability starts being slowly but surely part of every single department's decision making. And then the final type, which is quite rare these days, but I'm sure in the next years is going to happen, to be seen a lot more often, is those businesses that embed in every single department a sustainability person, where you have product design from the perspective of sustainability being considered, ops, finance, and all these different departments from the perspective of how are we transforming our economic model of making money for our shareholders to also work for other stakeholders like the government, like individuals, like the consumers. The clients that we work with are normally enterprises, so we work with companies like BMW, Audi, BNP Paribas, and even the European Commission is a client. And we definitely have seen over the last years massive shift towards actual decarbonization rather than simply this reporting angle that is the obvious one given all the legislation.
From the timber side, yes, it's a daily business. What we need to do is the convincing and the explaining. And funny enough, the word transparency frightens away not only the southern hemisphere but also the northern hemisphere. So it's overall in this sector, if you provide something which can now be easily traceable and provides more transparency, especially in the forestry, it becomes very rigid. So now the champions what we have, especially in Latin America, the biggest clients are in Chile and now in Brazil, which is a good example also that they can also now start sharing this. And of course, we help them to share the success stories. Also in Africa, where we see that slowly but surely, they are not anymore afraid that some envelopes might be put left, side, right and center. They are actually interested in implementing and having a more operational and also easily manageable system for their sector, which is dealing with the natural resources. So for us, where we see that the best synergy comes is the combination of government and the private sector, because usually the forest is either only solely owned by a state or it's 50-50. So there we see that this synergy helps also to, in the countries, territories, to implement the solution what we have.
And to comment from the single Earth perspective, like how do we see demand? Well, that actually relates back to the heated discussion that we had previously about like who is responsible and who has to do all these changes to solve climate change. So in the team, we also had quite a heated debate around like who is going to buy our token. So we put this value, or we create these tokens based on the work nature does. It can be something like carbon or biodiversity, and it can be bought by businesses or individuals. And at the very beginning, we understood that we don't really care who buys that for as long as somebody buys them, because our mission is to finance nature protection. So if the buyer is businesses, okay, we go for businesses. If it's individuals, we can go for them. We had a lot of debate. Some people were totally convinced that it's going to be businesses. Others were like super bullish on the new innovative ways of touching the Web3 space and how can we tie to the individual value propositions. So we ended up testing it. So we came to the market and we created two offers. So one for the businesses to buy the tokens, to make a contribution to nature, to make a contribution to their ESG performance and all of that. And the other one to the individuals, to take simple climate action and to get something that will become valuable for them in the future, like a financial instrument that has been financed directly, that has financed nature protection directly to the landowner. So we put them on the market simultaneously, basically, and just wanted to see like who is going to be then the main audience. And what we saw was just like undoubtedly we saw that individuals were growing super fast. There was a huge demand from the individual side for something that would give them control over the climate change, biodiversity loss, and nature management in general. While the companies have a very long process of looking into things, discussing things. So a few of them ended up buying them. There's a few, and there's more probably who will do that. But I think if we compare the uptake or the initial reaction on the market, then the individuals were actually the ones who kind of are desperate to do something about this and who were really looking forward to something that could enable them to fix climate change and biodiversity loss.
And if we come to raw material business, this industry hasn't really changed for decades, and we really want to bring disruption here. Of course, our clients, they are more and more clients are looking for sustainability, but of course the price plays a huge role as well. So in that terms, it helps if the government and the legislation promotes sustainable technologies, and this promotes fossil-based technologies.
So it does, the governmental actions towards the private sector, it kind of creates a platform for you guys to do your job and combat the climate change, right? Is it all already so good, or what still has to be done? You still need to develop your product, of course. Any startup needs funding, of course.
In terms of hardware, climate tech hardware, it's capex. This is super expensive. It's very hard to find investors for large-scale projects, and this is the main challenge. There are governmental activities, there are EU activities, and globally they are only on the increase. Also, if we look at the Emission Reduction Act in US, for example, these are of a great help, but now it's the action time. These need to be implemented, and those processes need to be sped up also during the current energy crisis we have and what's happening in the world. Because that's the only way to go from fossil-based to sustainable.
So let's get some specific facts. Let's get some 4 facts that what needs to be done still to kind of boost up the process. So you're saying scaling up the financial processes for scale-ups or for hardware technologies. That's point number 1.
I'm gonna add a few points because I think there's a lot to be done still. So 2.5 years ago, we set up a community called the Cleantech Alliance, which at the moment has more than 2,000 members, green tech companies that address different challenges around the world, all related to climate change. And we have been supporting these companies with access to capital, visibility, and expertise. What became quite evident from the moment when we started working with the companies was that financing was not only a problem of scale, it was a problem of vehicles, specific instruments that can be aligned to the needs of hardware startups or startups that require a lot of working capital for experimentation and so on. And it was also a problem of education that obviously is fundamental to the whole climate change challenge. On the topic of the scaling, so at the moment the vehicles that exist there, such as accelerators, VCs, private equity money, are not fitting exactly the needs of startups in the green tech sphere, and that has made it a bit difficult for many companies to experiment to start with and then be able to scale. The reason for this is that the VC or the private equity model is heavily focused on returns that have to come within the next 10 years. But climate change, or like the complexity of the challenges related to climate change, is not a straightforward problem. It's not like a marketing optimization tool that you need to build. It really is a lot more complex, and the return on investment might not be as straightforward exactly because of what you were saying. The economic model is not built to be able to deliver for scaling up impact. The second issue related to the kind of the mechanisms is the education, is the fact that you have a lot of people that don't understand really what he's doing, what I'm doing, why does it matter, why is it going to make money, why is it essential for these solutions to exist in order to address climate change at scale. And that, of course, immediately makes the discussion with an investor a lot more challenging, because you're trying to explain to them that you're addressing humanity's biggest challenge by building a new material that is going to sequester, let's say, carbon, or is going to optimize KPI gathering for decarbonization. If they don't see the need of this problem being solved, they don't have the backing in their team of why this needs to be funded altogether. And then the final bit that I think is quite critical is that we don't look at climate and then returns to the point that you made earlier of this not being a problem to be solved, but like actually an opportunity. What we always tell to our clients is that if they have a straightforward, really well-defined and also well-funded decarbonization agenda, they're going to be the leaders of their industry. I think this is still not fully understood by the investors, and that also acts as a challenge for financing to be an effective tool of scaling of solutions at this point.
Sorry. Few very concrete things. What I already mentioned, what would help also, for example, at Timberter to rise and shine, is that the European Commission, together with the member states, to adopt the regulation that forest monitoring and observation is fully digital, because it should be a new normality, not that it's a few cases. From there, also the UN level, that this will be advocated, and the IPCC methodologies will be revised, which are also currently the basis for the carbon offset projects. So it means also that the verifiers, currently two main, should also take into account when we are pumping in money or pumping out money from developing countries, that this data is also verifiable and also you can reproduce it, which is not the case currently. So these would help us, and I think it's also overall supporting the digital transformation. We like to talk about all these booths here. I think 10 times an hour you hear the digital transformation, but if there is a will, there is a way. Now we need a will, because way is there.
Yeah, and from our side, I'm going to add something totally different, which is collaboration with universities. So I think one of the main things that startups in this sector need is a very strong science basis. And it's really difficult to collaborate with universities. So we tried that at the beginning. We understood that we need to have very scientific solutions to what we do and kind of scientific proof to what we do. So we tried to collaborate with universities, but somehow we didn't have a framework to work with them. So we didn't know how to do that. So we talked to scientists, but we weren't able to figure it out. So in the end, we ended up hiring our own science team. So we have like 20 scientists in-house who are doing the work for us. But I think there's a lot of improvements that can be done to scale innovation with the help of actual scientists and in collaboration with universities, because startup founders are probably the ones who often have like this crazy vision, and then a very supportive and good collaboration from the scientific community could actually help this to make this a really impactful project.
So there are like two different types of science-based startups, right? One are those that are initiated from the science or from research, and then they grow and kind of spin off or spin out from the universities, and then they found their lead entrepreneur or the CEO slash founder, who's the scientist, him or herself, hopefully, and then the startup can grow. And the other way is that a team comes up with a solution, might be experts in their field, but they might not have a science-based background behind the company. But for sure, the value proposition to either investors or corporates or clients would be stronger if they had that, and that would kind of, there's the engagement with the universities. Yes, that wasn't a question, or that was a statement.
But I think it's a really important comment you make, because it really matters for this science-backed approach to be the only one that we follow. I come from finance. I used to work in investment banking and then fintech. And when I was confronted with the climate change issue in 2016, I was absolutely paralyzed by the fact that the only thing that I was given from pop culture and from the basics of what was available in maybe more popular media, not in the scientific one, was that we don't have a chance against climate change, and that's a big issue. I spent close to a year educating myself about climate change, and then the first thing that I did when I founded Plan A was to get the first hire that was a scientist. Because after spending a year with the science, it was so evident that all of the solutions were already there, but they were not funded, they were not scaled, there was no collaboration with the universities, and the university were feeling paralyzed because they felt like they were getting even more excited about the fact that they know how to respond to the challenges, but they were also getting angrier because no one was supporting their vision. And today we're also at the same size, like I think a quarter of the team, so maybe 25, 30 people, climate data scientists, and that's the beginning of every single solution that we develop, every single module. And I think what the EU definitely needs to think about, given that they're at the forefront of decision making, I think for the whole world in a way for climate change, given how much work has been done, is to actually put very strict rules around greenwashing, because there's just so many companies that popped up because the sustainability opportunity obviously is really big, that are not science-backed. And that means that we're basing our decision-making on something that is not valid.
Mm-hmm. You wanted to add something? No.
Not at
We do have the open Q&A also for the audience, either online, who is watching us there. We should have the slide or QR code on the screen as well. So if you do have questions, I can see there's a few already up there. As we are running out of time, I think we should do this maybe for 2 hours more, so bear with us. Typically, a startup in a startup sector or in an economy operates based on valuation or rising valuation of a company, right? So you start a company, you raise a couple of tens of thousands of euros, your valuation grows, you kind of tune up your team, you raise more funding, valuation grows. Eventually, you have raised so much funding that your valuation is very high. Investors love that. And then eventually the founders see that now is the time for exit. So selling your company or going public. So making the investments liquid for the investors. Well, for yourself as well. How different are cleantech startups? I don't know if it's a good question. I hope not too many investors are listening to us, but...
It's
So-
a very challenging question. Like I have been thinking about this and all the different options. So there's an option that like a bigger company buys you, the company, and then you kind of they start using your whatever IP they have to fulfill their own strategy. It can be a good thing. It can work out perfectly fine. But it can also go horribly wrong. Doing an IPO is also an interesting idea because then you kind of become public and then people can start buying your stocks or rather the investors. And then it becomes again challenging, like what is going to happen then with the company? Is it still going to have the same values or is it going to turn into something else? I think we are still yet to see what is the main exit strategy for cleantech startups. I think there's room for interesting new developments in that space as well.
For hardware startups, definitely the ROI for hardware compared to software is longer, and this is just as it is. It takes more time, it takes more money to achieve great things, but the great revolution has already risen from the IT revolution. The same needs to come for industrialization in terms of making the industrialization sustainable. So this is the next area to revolutionize.
It is important to think of the vehicles that companies have to be able to exit as those that can deliver most impact when it comes to the clean tech companies. I think the system that we've developed for financing is actually valid. I don't live by the vision that we need to revolutionize every single element of our economic model. I think we need better KPIs, also more currencies that actually are aligned to what we're doing to nature. But the options that are on the table for startups on how they can exit are absolutely valid. And the caveat that is specific for clean tech companies is that they need to align themselves to a set of values when they decide what is the best option. And these values need to lead to the highest impact. I think there's been quite a lot of examples of companies going public and also companies being acquired that has failed, especially in the current economic model or current economic situation that we have. It is evident that valuations also can be overblown and they go quite quickly, quite down. I think in our context is one where, regardless of what vehicle you decide to go for, you need to opt out for the maximum impact.
I think the clean tech as an umbrella nowadays to establish or even to start a business is a must for whichever company, whether it is a hardware or the software basis. And the opportunities are there. Of course, it depends also how you outstand among all these millions of and what is your opportunity to scale. So the scalability gives, of course, the attractiveness. But also what we have learned in Timbuktu side is that also to expand the variety what you are providing, that you have as comprehensive solution as possible, which also makes, of course, you expand your clients, but also you expand your business in this term that you are now covering and providing, let's say, one-stop shop on something which sounded 10 years ago as a niche, but it's not anymore because all these supportive incentives are coming slowly but surely together.
From this, I can kind of grasp maybe that it's actually quite ridiculous now, if you think. I mean, all the audience at COP27 as well. It's ridiculous that we actually have to distinct the business as usual from clean tech, right? So maybe we can kind of close that gap, and then we will have our aspiring pathways towards reaching climate neutrality as well. We're 50 seconds out, so I have 10 more questions. We'll start with the first one. Looking at one year from now, what do you think will be the main topic that should be or will be discussing here at COP28 about your sector?
How to speed up the scale up.
Unification of reporting standards.
How to help people and businesses to join in this mission.
full-scale implementation of the Article 13 transparency framework.
Excellent. And then from the perspectives of the panelists, we also got a few points that are needed to be done for speeding up the scaling up or kind of implementing the Cleantech solutions. The first one was speeding up the financial processes. The second was more or less kind of like more different models for financing, also distincting profit versus impact. Also, in a more specific way, forestry monitoring should be fully digitized. I think that goes for basically every sector, so that could be measured, thus improved. And the collaboration with the university, so bringing in more science base to the startups that are actually making impact. Well, this panel definitely made my life so easy. I had a very great discussion. Thank you very much, and for the audience as well. Thank you for tuning in, and let's enjoy the rest of the COP27. Thank you.